もしやコスモでは。
Cosmo needs me free.
Cosmo AP Luxury Sports.
I haven't really been into this trunk since I first pulled the car into the shop. But once again, I'm getting the junk out of the trunk because I need to access the fuel tank. Which means that this episode we are tackling the fuel system. Let's put that highly delicate unobtainium trim somewhere else. The fuel tank has to be modified for an EFI style high pressure pump because of course right now it's set up for a carburetor with a low pressure external fuel pump. And I want to go to an in-tank because that's what modern vehicles do. It makes the pump quieter, keeps it cooler, and prevents vapor lock at the input. Before I do that, I got to pull the fuel tank. I guess this access panel is probably the first step. Ooh, stuff. I can't get the rubber fill tube off, so I'll just cut that out and I'll get a new one. The fact that I can't get it off probably means it's too brittle to use anyway. Odds of me spilling rancid fuel all over myself? I'd say quite a bit better than Rob Ford going into rehab. Oh, that is not good. I can't even identify that. This is like buildup one would find on the belly of a prostitute. Except smells better and tastes better. I guess it's no surprise this fuel level sender doesn't work. This tank is grody inside, just nasty. Needs a full cleaning and sealing. I don't know if you can see that, but that black tar used to be gasoline. To try to dissolve some of the nasty that's in the tank, I'm going to use some super clean. I guess what I'll just do is pour it in full strength, slosh it around a little, and then maybe cut it with some water and let it sit. I've never done this before. You know, I feel as though I should have goggles for this. These baffles are amazingly effective. Well, after shaking for a few minutes, the Super Clean has dislodged a ton of crap from the inside. So what I'm doing is filling it with warm water, and then I'm just going to let it sit for days and dissolve and percolate or whatever the hell it's going to do. I'll drain it out after enough time and repeat the process basically until nothing but clean water comes out. With the fuel tank fermenting, we can start to plumb from the front of the system. So that's going to start with the fuel pressure regulator and fuel Y block, and then to the fuel filter. But of course, all of these components need a whole bunch of fittings. Most fuel pressure regulators come with ORB, O-ring Boss fittings. So in order to move them to an AN flare, you have to install an adapter. These don't need to be cranked down, they just have to seat. The O-ring does all the sealing. Go. The fuel Y block is next, and this has NPT ports, so that needs a whole other set of adapters. NPT fittings need some kind of sealant. I typically use Teflon tape on the big fittings because pipe dope can get kind of icky. This is gas certified Teflon tape for gasoline, natural gas, or diesel. If you're going to use this, make sure to use the right Teflon tape because I doubt the stuff for home plumbing would last very long under pressurized gasoline. If you're really careful, some of these can be driven in with a socket. Next is the fuel filter with -10 O-ring ports, and I'm using a -10 to -6 adapter. A little bit of oil on the fitting. Due to the shape, I have to put the fitting in the vise and screw the filter onto it. Again, these O-rings don't have to be cranked down, just snugged up. It appears that the best and frankly only place for the fuel pressure regulator is right about here. I'll use some of this 3/8 plate to make a mount, and that'll space it far enough from the intake manifold that the throttle cable can sneak through. And the height of it is not critical, so I'll just mark it there and cut it. I want the regulator to be reasonably centered in the bracket, and even with the top of the intake manifold runner, which is about there, I'll just very carefully drill this for 5 millimeter so that I can tap it for M6. God, I hope that's straight. Very carefully tapping these holes out to M6 by 1.0. Now that all that stuff is back on the car, I can bolt the regulator in place. This is more than a little awkward because the bolts that hold the bracket in place are blocked by the regulator itself. So these tiny Allen head screws have to be inserted from the bottom once the regulator bracket is bolted in place. The absolute perfect spot for this fuel Y block is right about here. Unfortunately, none of the mounting holes line up. So in order to make the mounting holes compatible and to give this Y-block a little bit of extra height, I'm just making a mounting plate out of 3/16 aluminum. Trace it out, drill my holes, and cut her out on the bandsaw. These bolt holes aren't symmetrical, so I just made a paper template of the mounting plate, and I rubbed my fingers on a hooker to dirty them up a little. So I should be able to make an impression of the bolt holes that I can transfer right to the plate. Just have to line that up and center punch. I'm now countersinking the hole with a huge and kind of dull 5/8 bit. That way the large Allen head bolts sit below the surface so I can mount the fuel block flush. The mounting holes for the fuel Y block are being drilled out to 5mm so they can be tapped for M6. The mounting plate is almost done. The last thing I need to do is just slowly and carefully tap out those holes for M6, of course, in order to bolt down the fuel block. The holes in the Y block just need to be reamed out a little bit. So they'll fit M6 fasteners, because I think they're set up for some weird standard size. Now the mounting plate and fuel Y block can be bolted down. I had to exaggerate my countersinks a little bit with the Dremel just to give a little bit of wiggle room, because the template that I made to get these holes was not quite perfect. So the holes didn't end up exactly where they could have been. And the Y block just mounts with some Allen head stainless M6 bolts. I went with an Allen head because there's no clearance around the sides of it for a socket to fit. Plus it looks cool. Well, the one thing about filling the tank full of water is that it probably weighs about 200 pounds. The tank's been sitting for about a week. Now I guess I got to drain it, and I am stupidly going to start a siphon here with my mouth. This will probably take a while. God, all the baffles in this thing make it really difficult to empty out. That's kind of the point, though. I've flushed the tank a few times now with water, and the water is basically running clear, but I can still see that there's like a film inside the tank. So I'm going to pour the rest of the super clean in swish it around a little, and then just let the stuff sit full strength for a few days. With the inside of the fuel tank soaking once again, I can get back to the plumbing. Here's the basic layout of what I'm doing. Right now I'm just kind of mocking things up with the fittings to make sure it looks sane and works. It's a lot of fittings right now, but very soon, as soon as I start plumbing, it will all make sense. This is the first time I've ever used Russell Pro Classic 2 hose. So I put the first end on off camera just in case there were any surprises. Oh, and I finally bought me a set of Van wrenches. Basically, at this point, with all the fittings in place, it's just a matter of connecting the dots, trying to run these lines in as sane a manner as possible. We'll try to mark the black hose with black marker. The way that I cut this hose is to first wrap it reasonably tightly with electrical tape. Transfer my cut mark to the tape. Then cut through it very quickly with the grinder. Now, the tape has to be removed before the socket is put on, so the braid is going to pop out a little bit. Let's see, counterclockwise is the direction that these things twist on. I like to put a little bit of tape on the hose so that I know if it's pushed out too far. A little bit of oil on the threads and nipple of the fitting. It drops inside the socket. Get the nipple into the hose. And now just screw it in. I like to put some pressure on the hose to prevent it from pushing out should there be a rough spot during insertion. That's an assembled AN hose. Well, I just now have a whole bunch more of those to do, starting with the fuel feed to the rear of the primary fuel rail. Oh, this is going to be a short one. That, however, is not what she said. As you may or may not be able to tell, I have assembled more than one of these before. Unfortunately, the AN wrench doesn't fit the socket side of these fittings, so I'm stuck using my stupid taped up adjustable. This is short and there's not a lot of wiggle room, so I'm really hoping it fits. Looking good so far. Just avoid cross-threading that. Now, visiting the tank again, it seems that the Pure Super Clean is removing the gunk and crap and whatever the hell that is from the bottom of the tank very effectively. The next two lines require the upper intake to be reinstalled. Since the other two lines are assembled exactly the same way as the previous ones I just did, well, there's probably no point of forcing everybody to sit through minutes of me assembling AN lines on camera. So here they are. This is the feed from the primary fuel rail to the regulator. And this one connects to the rear of the secondary fuel rail and onto the regulator. On the top of the fuel Y block, there's a 1/8 inch NPT port, which, by the way, the factory did not install sealant on when they plugged it. I will be using this port for my fuel pressure sensor, so with a little bit of Teflon tape on the threads, it just screws right in. This whole apparatus is the factory condensation tank, which I no longer need. The stock electric vibrator style fuel pump goes away. These old rancid fuel lines can now come down to be replaced by brand new stainless steel. Ah, the glamorous world of car building. It's like cleaning up after a night with Lindsay Lohan.
You've probably noticed that this line is already half built. Now the reason that happened is because I had fully intended to make a line off camera as practice. Of course, I screwed up on the absolute last bend on that line, so it wouldn't fit into the bracket in the engine bay. So I then started making this line, only to realize that I could actually use the back half of the bad line since I had to cut it to splice in a fuel filter anyway. At that point, I turned the camera back on so that I could continue filming the making of this line.
The knee is also a really good bending jig for slight straightening. That's not bad, I guess. Just a matter of marking out each bend and clearly marking the center of it. I discovered that on my first practice line, it was far easier to leave this coiled up while working with it, instead of uncoiling it and having 20 feet of tubing sticking out the other end, banging against everything in the shop. This is what I call the abs of steel bending jig. Gotta go real slow. Oh, still need another 30 degrees. They even sell this stuff with a warning that says, "Warning, do not attempt to hand bend." Now that looks overbent a little, but that's where the knee comes in. And much better. Can cut that off right about here and see if it fits the car. This last bend I've determined just isn't necessary. Now we'll just put this in place using the stock fuel line hangers. There's probably a little bit of tweaking this will need just to make it fit 100%, but so far it seems pretty good. Okay, these minor adjustments can just be made using the knee. I think though I'll probably have to put it up on the car and pull it down several times in order to get it to where it's going to be perfect. And after a lot of trips in and out from underneath the car and a lot of bending off camera, I have produced a fuel line. It still needs just a little bit of trimming on the ends, but for the most part it actually fits without too much persuasion. I gotta say though, this was an enormous pain in the ass. And I suggest that if you know someone who ever says, "Hey, I'm gonna make stainless steel fuel lines," that you find something large and heavy to hit them over the head with to knock some sense into them. Now this was that first line that I made where the front 90-degree section was an inch too far. So I've cut that off the front because the back section still fits perfectly and the fuel filter has to go there anyway. Before I trim this line and continue bending the line that goes up into the engine bay, I guess I'm going to have to mount the fuel filter, and this right here seems to be about where it'll go. So, just got to make some mounts. I think it'll probably be easiest if I draw the shape of the filter mount I have in my brain out in CAD, so we'll just quickly do this. Very, very simple bracket here, and a square for the bottom, close enough. Mark the center so I can draw a hole properly, and then a 0.5 inch by 0.5 inch box, which will become the, gotta grab it, there you go, which will become the tab to which I use to clamp. Okay, that's my shape, so we'll just print that. Really gotta find that used laser cutter or water jet machine so I can take the manual part out of translating these CAD drawings to actual components. Well, that's the shape of my bracket. Decided that I needed to add about 5 millimeters to the bottom of this because I need to have room for the Allen head bolt. We will start by drilling the center hole. There. The bracket's a bit of an irregular shape, so I'm going to use the welding vise to hold it straight up in the drill press. While I have the drill press set up, I might as well drill the mounting hole. Love these clamps. Now that slot is what turns into a clamp, and using a bolt and nut will let me clamp the filter into place. Well, I made one. Now all I have to do is make another and then mount them to the car. Like a Greek tragedy, the second bracket magically occurred off stage. So the way that these work is fairly simple. A bolt goes through the hole, and then it gets tightened down to close the hole a little. Which clamps the brackets onto the filter. Now here's hoping I got those lined up well enough and the filter slides right in. Yes, indeedy. And clamp it down lightly. With the filter so wonderfully mounted, it now has to be connected to the fuel lines. We'll start with a double female AN connector. Double female mounting. What a concept. And then use a 3/8 inch
NPT to -6 AN adapter, stainless steel, which will then screw into the double female. Screwing the double female. It's more interesting every time I say it. And we'll mark the line about here so I can remove it from the car and bend it to match. Well, it's going to take a bunch of tweaking to get this lined up, so I'm going to take care of that off camera, and when you next see it, it will be done. The process of working with this tubing is pretty damn tedious. It's a matter of bending it a little, testing the fit, bending it a little, testing the fit, and then when trimming it very slowly, because of course it's a lot harder to add tubing back than cut it off. So with the AN flare tacked on underneath the car, the line can come out once again and be moved over to the bench for the full welding. This is some incredibly delicate welding. The tube is only about 3/4 of a millimeter thick, and it's very, very easy to over-penetrate into the tube. And normally I wouldn't complain about a bit of over-penetration, but in this case it will severely restrict the inside of the tube. So I have to make a short weld, stop and let the heat dissipate, and then begin again. As it is, my welder current selection is down near 0, and it's still putting too much heat into the weld. Now I was, I guess, a little bit too hard on the pedal because a little bit of over-penetration happened. The nice thing about these stainless steel fittings is that they will take a little bit of abuse, so I can ream it out just a little bit. Can you tell yet that the enthusiasm has kind of left me for these fuel lines? It's just so tedious and it's taken so long. Thankfully, this is the probably the second last time this line has to come in and out. Just one more time to weld the AN bung on inside the car. This last little section I made off camera, and it goes between the fuel filter and the engine bay. It's the last part of the feed line. Now all I have to do is pull these lines down again so that I can weld all the fittings onto the rest of them. Well, after much struggle, it's nice to have the fuel hard lines finished and bolted into place. Now, just have to start on the soft lines to the engine. This is the fuel return line, which has to exit the bottom of the regulator and head back to the tank. Now, I've already made the feed line off camera just so I can make sure everything fits. This can run right along the feed line. Put a clamp right there. And then meet up with the regulator about there. Well, that basically fits. It'll look a bit better once I put some clips to tie the lines down and keep them from jumbling everywhere. But that basically finishes the fuel lines in the engine bay. Now time to move back to the fuel tank. Well, the fuel system plumbing is basically done. There's still a lot of work to do, mainly on the fuel tank. After all, it is a fuel tank designed for a carburetor, and it needs to be converted to house a high-pressure fuel injection pump. However, since that's a bunch more work, I think we will do that next time.